Hi, this is Eric. It is Friday, March 21st. I guess it's the first day of spring, 2025. And I want to talk about a topic that's been on my mind for a while, especially because I've been I talk with people all the time and, get their opinions about things. I like to hear what people have to say. And so this is the result of my discussions with people both individually in the past and also recently. And I belong to discussion groups, and sometimes these kinds of topics come up. So I've written an article which I call Historical Denial and Nihilistic Thinking, which I posted on my website, and it's also on Substack. So here goes. You can learn a lot by talking with people and listening to what they have to say. There's a concept that I call willful avoidance of reality. I was staying at a resort in 2022 and had a short discussion with an Israeli regarding pursuit of truth. He said that he preferred ignorance because he wants to be happy and truth is painful. 2 years later, after experiencing ethnic cleansing, constant attacks, blockading food and other essential supplies, Palestinian militants broke out of what has been called the world's largest open-air prison, Gaza. It attacked Israeli military bases and settlements that are both civilian and military, and about 1,200 people were killed, and several hundred hostages taken. The Palestinians demanded that they be exchanged for the thousands of Palestinians, many of whom are minors, who've been in prison for many years. We also learned through investigative journalists at the Gray Zone that the Israeli military itself attacked its own people in its confusion, or even worse, to prevent them becoming hostages. This is something called the Hannibal Directive, which means that they don't want to have hostages that can be used as bargaining chips to get Palestinian hostages back. The Israelis say the attack was unprovoked and unjustified. However, international law says that unoccupied people have the right to resist their oppressors. One way to determine reality is to go back to original sources. So see below for who said is the source of the problem. The reality is that whatever this gentleman likes to think, Israeli society is deeply fragmented at this point. Many soldiers have been killed, maimed, and traumatized out of guilt for their own behavior. And of course, it's even worse for the Palestinians. All this results because 90% of Israelis refuse to face the painful truth about the founding of Israel. But the truth has been spelled out quite clearly in Einstein's 1948 letter to the New York Times, co-signed by 28 prominent Jews. And yet, Zionists insist that they speak for all Jews. Another lie. This is willful, not just avoidance, but rejection of both historical and present-day reality. I quote from an article from Global Research, which is an excellent website. It's been around for over 20 years, and they talk about this particular letter. And I quote, "Of relevance to recent developments in Israel," this is as of 2023, "we bring to the attention of our readers the following letter by Albert Einstein and others to the New York Times, published on December 4th, 1948. Quote, "It is of utmost significance to reflect upon a historical process initiated at the very outset of the State of Israel. What is outlined in this letter depicted the atrocities committed against the people of Palestine in 1948 in the village of Deir Yassin, vividly describing what is currently ongoing more than 75 years later in the State of Israel." I'm going to move on to a speech that the noted playwright Harold Pinter gave at his Nobel Prize in 2005. Here are two quotes from his iconic acceptance speech. Quote, "The majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are interested not in truth, but in power and in the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it is essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives. What surrounds us, therefore, is a vast tapestry of lies upon which we feed. And here, Pinter points directly at the problem of historical denial about U.S. foreign policy. Quote, "The United States supported and in many cases engendered every right-wing military dictatorship in the world after the end of the Second World War. I refer to Indonesia, Greece, Uruguay, Brazil, Paraguay, Haiti, Turkey, the Philippines, Guatemala, El Salvador, and of course Chile. The horror the United States inflicted upon Chile in 1973 can never be purged and can never be forgiven. Hundreds of thousands of deaths took place throughout these countries. Did they take place? Are they, in all cases, attributable to U.S. foreign policy?" He says, and I emphasize, the answer is yes, they did take place, and they are attributable to American foreign policy, but you wouldn't know it. It never happened. Nothing ever happened. Even while it was happening, it wasn't happening. It didn't matter. It was of no interest. The crimes of the United States have been systematic, constant, vicious, remorseless, but very few people have actually talked about it. You have to hand it to America. It has exercised a quite clinical manipulation of power worldwide while masquerading as a force for universal good. It's a brilliant, even witty, highly successful act of hypnosis. Now I want to talk about conspiracy theory as rationalization. Another example of this avoidance is the notion of conspiracy theory. One of the biggest functions of mass media is manufacturing consent. It's the use of a government concocted narrative foisted on the public as what really happened. The problem is that the powers that be face is that some of their pesky citizens question the narrative. They notice anomalies and contradictions to the official story. One of the most famous is the magic bullet theory, which took the life of President John F. Kennedy. This bullet took various turns in trajectory. Along with it was the narrative of the lone gunman. A conspiracy implies more than one person involved in a crime. Subsequent investigation proved that 8 bullets were fired from different directions. So when the Warren Commission report on the JFK assassination was carefully examined, and it became obvious that it was a cover-up, the idea appeared that those who questioned the official narrative were engaged in conspiracy theories. Ah, but who came up with the term conspiracy theory? It was none other than the CIA, who had been deeply implicated in JFK's death. Indeed, Allen Dulles, CIA director, was fired by Kennedy for the disastrous Bay of Pigs fiasco. And yet, who did the Warren Commission put in charge of vetting evidence? Allen Dulles. It's like asking a bank robber to investigate a robbery. And it's the CIA who tells you not to consider an obvious conflict of interest in the investigation, right in front of your nose. It's all a conspiracy theory. I'm quoting here from an article by Paul Craig Roberts, who's another very interesting commentator who's been around since the Reagan administration. Quote, "In 2013, Professor Lance DeHaven Smith, in a peer-reviewed book published by the University of Texas Press, showed that the term conspiracy theory was developed by the CIA as a means of undercutting critics of the Warren Commission report that President Kennedy was killed by Oswald. The use of this term was heavily promoted in the media by the CIA. And there's a link to his book, which is available on Amazon. Continuing. It is ironic that the American, I include the word fake, the American fake left is a major enforcer of the CIA strategy to shut up skeptics by branding them conspiracy theorists. The reason why the majority of people believe some form of the official story is because it has been a long-term project of manufacturing consent. And I include a video of an interview by Noam Chomsky, who was the primary author of that book. Nihilistic thinking as a psychological defense against objective facts and truth. So how do people manage to keep their sanity, which is in fact insanity posing as normal? People who maintain narrative control use cynical methods to prevent people from facing reality. For example, President Obama was, when faced with former crimes committed by the United States, said something to the effect that, well, what's past is past, let's just forget it and move on. Imagine a convicted killer saying to the judge, sure, I killed them, but let's move on. By the way, Obama, in a press conference at one point, said, I'm pretty good at killing, but let's move on. He didn't say, he put those, there were two separate statements. He said, I'm pretty good at killing, and then another time he said, you know, what's past is past, let's move on. Another technique is to introduce a number of conflicting conspiracy theories which confuse and exhaust people's ability to think critically. So before the first Iraq War, the first Gulf War, we called it, a PR firm got a young woman to testify that Saddam Hussein's soldiers threw babies out of incubators to let them die on the cold floor. Or before the next war, it was Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, which turned out didn't exist. In neither case were those true. They were just lies foisted on the public to confuse them and get them to go along with the narrative, we have to invade Iraq. This is an example of the highly successful big lie of the CIA director, Bill Casey. He was the CIA director during the Reagan administration. And it said that there was a staffer, a woman was at this first cabinet meeting of the Reagan administration, and Bill Casey said, we'll know our disinformation program is complete when everything the U.S. public believes is false. That's Bill Casey, the CIA director. Interestingly enough, as a side note, when there was something called the Iran, I think it was the Iran-Contra scandal, and Bill Casey was scheduled to testify at a certain point, but he was in the hospital for some reason, and strangely enough, he died of a stroke or something in the hospital before he was going to testify. So, too bad. Sorry, Bill. But the more pernicious approach that people take, and by the way, he was going to have to testify under oath, so he couldn't get away with lying so easily, and that's probably why he unfortunately died early. But the more pernicious approach that people take, and I see many people when faced with uncomfortable facts that contradict their delusion, is to negate the existence of objective truth. And I've met several people in recent times where they're basically saying there's no such thing as objective truth. This phenomenon was first pointed out by the Indian philosopher Nagarjuna. He pointed out that it is easy to negate a particular proposition logically, but then people go on to negate objective fact. With this type of thinking, people are susceptible to believing that 2 + 2 may sometimes equal 5 and not 4. It's easy to simply disregard everything as unknowable. I run into people all the time with this attitude. Still, try walking across the street in traffic, not looking both ways. It's all a matter of opinion. Will you get hit by a car if you walk across the street? No, it's just a matter of opinion. We'll never really know because it's in the past. We will never really know because people simply have different perspectives. It's all too complicated. This is a lazy, insincere attitude to avoid taking responsibility. Most Americans don't give a second thought to the genocide against the Native Americans, or slavery, or racist attitude towards African peoples. They simply don't notice that the same casual attitude towards those outrages manifests in later times in the millions of deaths of U.S. wars of conquest in Hawaii, the Philippines in the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. Oh, but that was so long ago. We're not like that anymore. It allows them to overlook the mass deaths of civilians in Dresden, the Tokyo fire bombings, the 2 atomic bombs in Japan in World War II, or the 2 million deaths in Stalingrad, and claiming that the Soviet Union had nothing to do with winning World War II. The justification for actual war crimes allowed perpetrators to rationalize their crimes. Oh, but that happened so long ago. The same is true of the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and all the post-September 11th, 2001 wars, all based on lies, justifying mass murder. Oh, it was all a mistake. Nothing can be done about it now. Or worse, they deserved it. And if I may say the craziest, cruelest formulation, it was God's will. George Bush said, "The American people are good people." Well, it's largely true, but they're gullible. In a recent Facebook comment, someone naively asked, "So why did Russia invade Ukraine? Where has she been for the last 10 years? Indeed, the last 30 years of United States broken treaties and promises given to Russia, broken promises, or the incessant shelling by a coup government installed by Joe Biden in 2014 of citizens of their own country who had the silly idea that the new regime was illegal and bent on their destruction based on their ethnicity." What has got to do with why Russia would decide that they needed to protect these people who were on the verge of getting annihilated? The problem in all this is that while it looks like nobody has been or will be held accountable, eventually the chickens come home to roost. Thus, this nihilistic attitude is a psychological defense. The cure for historical denial and nihilistic thinking is truth and reconciliation. Following decades of long struggle by Africans to free themselves from racist settler colonialism in South Africa, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission sought to hold those accountable and to acknowledge and apologize for those crimes. The way to do that is to go back and look at the historical record. Did the United States and the European colonial states have the courage to look in the mirror? As this article is being written, there are 2 horrific wars going on, both based on lies and exploitation. The British are notorious for cooking up lies and accusations in order to justify to themselves, as well as to others, the attacks on various countries. Russia is a great threat to England. They repeat this again and again. So how real is this threat? How many times in history has Russia invaded or attacked England? Answer: 0. How many times have the British attacked Russia? 3 times. The Crimean War of 1853 to 1856. After the 1917 Russian Socialist Revolution, 14 countries, including England, invaded Russia to, quote-unquote, strangle socialism in its crib. It's direct, interference in the affairs of another country. Currently, as we speak, British missiles have been hitting Russian targets launched from Ukraine. And the UK's role in fomenting the current war is self-evident. In April 2022, Russia went in to Ukraine, worked on a negotiated settlement in Istanbul. But Boris Johnson insisted that Ukraine keep fighting. So did the U.S., as Senator Lindsey Graham insists that Ukraine fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. The Ukrainian official, Ermak, who was the assistant to Zelensky, inconveniently admitted Johnson's sabotaging peace. British accusations appear to be more a psychological projection of their own obsessive hatred of Russia. I'll bet that if Russia ever retaliates, the public will say, "Gee, why did they do that to us?" The question is, when people's psyches are so heavily defended that they either deny the truth or become openly hostile to the question, how can we face the past and face current reality? Worse yet, as the saying goes, if you can convince people that absurdities are true, you can convince them to commit atrocities. Instead, consider this story. This comes from my study of Buddhism. The people of Kalama asked the Buddha who to believe out of all the ascetics, sages, venerables, and holy ones who, like himself, passed through their town. This is like the mass media. Who do you believe? MSNBC and CBS, ABC, New York Times, Washington Post. Who do you believe? They complained that they were confused by the many contradictions that they discovered in what they heard. So this was the Buddha's reply. Do not believe anything on mere hearsay. Do not believe in traditions merely because they are old and have been handed down for many generations and in many places. Do not believe anything on account of rumors or because people talk a lot about it. Do not believe anything because you are shown the written testimony of some ancient sage, such as maybe Thomas Friedman of the New York Times or David Ignatius or Rachel Maddow, for that matter. The Buddha didn't cite those people, so forgive me for my editorial insertion. Do not believe in what you have fancied, thinking that because it is extraordinary, it must have been inspired by a god or other wonderful being. Do not believe anything merely because presumption is in its favor or because the custom of many years inclines you to take it as true. Things like America the Beautiful. We were always a force for good in the world, and the British colonialism was the white man's burden to bring civilization to the untutored masses of the rest of the world. Do not believe anything merely because presumption is in its favor or because the custom of many years inclines you to take it as true. Do not believe anything merely on the authority of your teachers or priests. But whatever, and this is a key point, but whatever, after thorough investigation and reflection, you find to agree with reason and experience as conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, and of the world at large, accept only that as true, and shape your life in accordance with it. The Buddha also said, do not accept any doctrine from reverence, but first try it out as gold is tried by fire. This is basically using scientific method in order to determine what is actually going on in the world. So don't take my word for it. Test it for yourself. Whenever somebody says something, check it out. See if it makes sense to you. Cross-check it. See if somebody has another opinion. And then you can, and the main thing is try to go to the original source. So when probably the most egregious example of these things was when the Israelis say that Hamas attacked us unprovoked, or that Russia invaded Ukraine unprovoked. They do this deliberately to prevent you from looking at the source of the problem. Why did this problem take place? Because the solution to the problem exists when we look at the actual source of the problem. So that's what I want to talk about, and I'd like to suggest that you go through the article as it's written, because there are some other video links that I think you might find useful. And also, you can visit my shops where you can buy an awareness-building T-shirt or other item. You can use these as a conversation starter, because what we really need, if we're going to dig ourselves out of the existential hole that our society is sliding further and further into, we have to really be willing to face the truth ourselves, and then be willing to try to raise other people's consciousness. If you can find an opening to someone to ask a question. Is that really true? Who said it? Why did they say it? Those kinds of questions. So that's what I'd like to finish with, and thank you very much for listening. And if you find this useful, please subscribe to my channel, and if you'd like, you can even, as I say, buy one of my t-shirts, or maybe even make a contribution to my work, because some of the things that I do cost money, and it's helpful when I have a little acknowledgement of my work. So thank you very much.